Everybody, I'm here with your astrology headlines for the month of October 2025. These are not like my most popular videos as far as views, but I know the people that like them really like them, so I'm going to continue to do these. Also, if you do like these and you want like a written format of this, I do have a monthly newsletter that comes out that's free that has all the headlines for the month, so you can sign up for that in the links below. If you want a more detailed astrology week by week, I do have on my Patreon. I do have the seeker level. We have weekly astro headlines talking about all of the stuff going on astrologically day by day, as well as taroscopes. So you can check that out if you're interested. Got to do the plug. But besides that, let's get into the headlines for the month of October. So October, we're out of eclipse season. We're moving away from that. September was all about the eclipses. We don't have any retrogrades of the personal planets this month. We do have a Mercury retrograde coming up in November, but nothing this month. So, you know, it's a little bit less dramatic when it comes to the astrology headlines, but that doesn't mean nothing's going on. I think the big thing this month is we do have Neptune moving back into the sign of Pisces. So Neptune spends about 14 years in a sign. It moves very slowly. It first went into Pisces in 2011. And then it went into Aries earlier this year. This is kind of like a preview of the next 14 years of the Mercury or of the Neptune in Aries era. And now it's doing a little back step into Pisces for the next few months, and early 2026 it'll step back into Aries for good for the next 14 years or so. So it's doing like a little cleanup, a little review, as whenever we retrograde back into the old sign, especially for the outer planets, it's kind of like stepping back, doing some cleanup, doing some review, reassessing things. And so like the Neptune in Pisces era can really be seen as kind of like the woke era, right? Neptune is all about our ideals. It's about what we idealize, what our kind of beliefs are, what we're kind of shooting for. Like, what is the ideal, especially in the collective mindset? Like, Neptune tends to be more about the collective subconscious, whereas the moon is more about our personal subconscious, right? So it's the collective unconscious, what we're kind of shooting towards. It can be really positive. Neptune's like a double-edged sword. It can be positive in that it brings us a sense of spirituality, a sense of oneness with others, but it can also be about fantasy and delusion and escapism. It also has connection with things like drugs and alcohol. And so if we look at that whole Neptune and Pisces era, we can look at the ideals. We're definitely around things like what people kind of call woke culture, right? And so it was very much emphasized a lot of Piscean things like empathy and compassion for others, which, you know, I definitely think is good, and definitely I think we need more of that these days with what's going on in the world. But empathy and compassion, but it was also blurring a lot of boundaries. I think there was also became an overemphasis on identifying with victimization. That became the ideal. The ideal was like sort of saying like, oh, like it was sort of like some people got into sort of like counting up their oppression points or whatever, trying to think like the more you suffer, which is a very Piscean thing, the more holy you are. So it kind of got to this kind of like extreme, and that often happens with whatever era Neptune's in, where it starts off with this ideal, and then as the era goes on, people take it to some extremes where it's unhealthy, and also people see that that ideal is not necessarily something that, you know, the ideal isn't the reality doesn't meet up with the ideal. And we saw that with like the Neptune in Aries era is very much one, like the preview we got over the past few months is idealizing these sort of very Aries qualities of things like leadership and independence, but also masculinity. And there's nothing wrong with like any of those things, but already we see people who are verging into sort of this more toxic, you know, where they think that leadership means bullying people, or leaning into, you know, aspects of toxic masculinity, or saying like empathy is toxic, things like that, where you already see that some people are taking things that are good and they are making it an extreme where it becomes not good. It becomes like too much. Neptune in Pisces era also was an era where we saw, because Neptune has to do with drugs and alcohol, things like marijuana being decriminalized in a lot of eras. We also saw the increase of like, what are they called? Mushrooms, like psilocybin, I think is what it is. But you know, that's a very Neptune in Pisces tends to be an era where we start to see sort of more of these psychoactive drugs and things like that come to the forefront, or more chemicals and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see with Neptune in Aries, because that's a more fiery sign. I wonder if like alcohol will become the thing that is more prominent when it comes to that end of Neptune as far as addiction. Neptune, of course, also rules the ocean. Neptune in Pisces was definitely an era where we saw sort of more emphasis on trying to like be more ecological with the oceans. We also saw though a lot of oil exploration and some disasters when it came to oil spills and things like that. Neptune in Aries, as far as the ocean goes, there is some concern that there may be more sort of like naval battles, things like that. Also the warming of the oceans might be something that occurs. So we'll have to see obviously how this all plays out. But Neptune is our ideals. Neptune is what it's what we're kind of shooting towards as a collective. And when we look back at the last Neptune in Aries era, this is the era of like the Civil War in the United States. There was definitely an emphasis on sort of idealizing the warrior and war, making it sound like that was ideal. And of course, by the end of that era, there was people were moving away from that and seeing how that led to just like so many deaths and so much violence and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see. That was also the era where we start to see the cowboy era, the idealization of like going out into, and at the time it was like the frontier and doing things on your own. And of course, that nobody does anything in isolation, right? And it has an effect on others, sometimes very negative, right? And so I wonder if we'll see more of those kind of things repeating as well. So be interesting to see, but Neptune's moving back into Pisces. And I think there is going to be a reassessment in some ways of this idea of, that right now going around that some people think empathy is bad. And Neptune and Pisces definitely emphasize things like compassion and empathy, which again are good things. As long as you don't fall into like, believing that victimization, is sort of like, makes you superior to somebody else or something like that. So definitely saw some of those things going on. But I think there is this sort of like, hey, wait a minute, it's important to have compassion. We don't do things by ourselves. We are part of a collective. And again, that's something else that I think the Neptune and Pisces era and the Neptune and Aries era have that are kind of opposing each other. Is Neptune and Pisces was very much about like systemic culture and how that oppresses people, which there is truth to that for sure. And then the Neptune and Aries era is going to be more about individual responsibility, which again, these things are both true at the same time. It's not one more than like over the other. They're both exist at the same time, but I think each era tends to emphasize one over the other. So it'll be interesting to see how that all kind of plays out as we move forward. So let's get into the rest. That I think is like the big sort of headline for the month. But starting off on October 6th, we have Mercury moving into the sign of Scorpio. Mercury usually spends about 3 weeks in a sign. The exception is when it's in retrograde. So Mercury in the sign of Scorpio, Mercury's about our communication, how we think about things. It's also travel. And Mercury in Scorpio tends to be like want to look at things deeper. It's about investigating things. It's about looking under every rock, turning over, each little piece of wood, see what's underneath it. It is looking at the ugly side of things. It is looking down deep. It is digging in that hole. And so I think people are really wanting to look beyond the surface of things. This is great for investigating things. This is great for having secrets come out. Certain files that people don't want released. Maybe we'll hear more about that. But people are not just looking for surface level answers. They're digging underneath. They're seeing what's behind the curtain. They're looking at that. They're asking questions. And it's not just out in the wider world. This is also in our personal lives as well. Looking deeper at things, really wanting to kind of turn things over. This is a great time for what they call shadow work, which really just personal reflection. Looking underneath things, doing journaling, doing some psychological work. Also great for spiritual work because Scorpio is a very intuitive sign, as all the water signs are, but it's really about going deep and looking within. You can do a lot of spiritual work when Mercury's in Scorpio. Mercury in Scorpio, as far as travel goes, we tend to want to return to things from the past, or we want to explore things on a deeper level. This is like, we don't want to just do like a whirlwind tour of something. We really want to focus on something and do something deep, like a retreat or something, or go to one particular area and really dive into, that particular area and what it has to offer. So as far as travel goes. Also on October 6th, we have a full moon. These are regular, no eclipses. We have a full moon and new moon this week as normal, or this month as normal. October 6th, we have a full moon at 14 degrees of Aries. So if you have a lot of Aries placements or placements around 14 degrees in your chart, this full moon may affect you more than others. Full moons always happen when the sun and moon are opposite signs. So we have the sun in Libra, which gets us Libra season is really about focusing on partnerships, on harmony. It's about focusing on one-on-one relationships, on making things beautiful. This is a great time to decorate and get things ready for the fall. And it's very much about focusing on the other and wanting to please others. And then the full moon in Aries says, wait a minute, you are also important as an individual. It wants us to express our individuality. This particular full moon, right before the moon changes signs, it's going to be conjunct with Neptune, and it's going to have a sextile with both Uranus and Pluto. So it's touching these outer planets again. It is making making positive aspects with them. So again, this full moon can have a lot of deep transformative energy for you, particularly if you're trying to balance out your individuality in a partnership or in a group of other people. So I think this can be a very healing full moon, especially if it is focused around healing, keeping your identity while being in a group or a partnership of some kind. On October 13th, we have Venus moving into the sign of Libra. So Venus spends about 4 weeks or so in a sign. Venus is about beauty. It is about love. It's about what we find aesthetically pleasing. It's definitely like considered a benefic, bringing good things to us. And she's going to Libra, which is one of her home signs. The other one is Taurus. Venus in Taurus tends to be more about the beauty of nature. Venus in Libra tends to be about man-made beauty. So things like the art that we make, the music that we make, fashion, those kind of things. So really a good time to focus on things like maybe revamping your wardrobe or redecorating. Also focusing on the partnerships in your life, focusing not just like romantic partnerships, but friendships too. It has this really lovely, harmonious, diplomatic quality to it. So really lovely energy. She definitely feels good in that sign. Also on October 13th, we have Pluto going direct at 1 degrees of Aquarius. So, Pluto's an outer planet, moves very slowly. We tend to not feel it so much unless it's directly hitting something in our chart. So if you have, a bunch of Aquarius planets, especially in the early degrees, or you have planets in any of the other signs in early degrees, you might feel this. Pluto direct, he stops and then he starts moving forward again. So he's going to start moving forward again into the sign, further into the sign of Aquarius. I find that with the outer planets, when they stop and station, it's like whether to go retrograde or to go direct forward, we tend to see it in the world, the themes of that planet in that sign. Pluto in Aquarius is the power of the collective. It is the power of the people. Last time Pluto was in Aquarius, we saw things like the French Revolution, the American government got set up, we got the Haitian Revolution. So it was a lot about the power of the people. So that may be something that really comes into play. This is also about changing technology. So there may be some announcements made with things like AI or new technology of some kind. It's also, though, like plutocrats. We may hear things about like the very rich that are, taking over and in power. So there's going to be some things around power dynamics on October 13th or around there that we're going to see sort of that conflict between the people at the top who are very rich, who want to control those at the bottom, and the power of the collective. I'm expecting to see some things in that area. On October 21st, we have a new moon. So new moons are when the sun and moon are in the same sign, and this is at 28 degrees of Libra. So new moons are good for setting intentions because both the sun and moon are working together. So our conscious mind, our active side, and then our subconscious receptive side are working together. So that's why it's great for planting seeds. Also, it's the start of a lunar cycle. This one has a square with Jupiter. Squares are stressful, and with Pluto. So this one has a more stressful aspect to it. And so it's asking us not to overextend ourselves. I find squares with Jupiter are telling us that we need to not overpromise, overextend, overdo things. And then the square with Pluto is kind of like we feel like we're coming up against the larger collective power. And so it's asking us to set intentions in the Libra area of your chart. If you know your chart, then look at that. Otherwise, Libra has to do with things like partnerships, it has to do with relationships, it has to do with harmony, it also has to do with justice to a certain degree, beauty as well. And so if we're looking at setting goals in those areas, we need to make sure we're not overdoing it, overextending ourselves. And also, sometimes the goals we have may not, we may feel peer pressure or pressure from society at large to do things, the way everyone else does. And so it's asking us to take a look at that this new moon. On October 22nd, we have that Neptune retrograding back into Pisces. I did talk about that. I'm expecting to see some themes around that time. There may be stuff that has to do with the ocean, like literally have to do with like something that happens nautically or, something that goes on with the ocean. But I am also seeing like people wanting to bring more compassion and empathy back into things. Also, a sense of there may be a talk about like victimization of people. Now, I don't want to like, don't get me wrong. There are people being victimized. Of course there are. I'm just talking about when people who aren't over-identify when I was talking about the other stuff. But I think there may be some things that come out that talk about people who've been victims perhaps of injustice of some kind around this time. So watch for that. We also have on this day the sun going into the sign of Scorpio, as it does this time of year every year. Sun in Scorpio moves us more to the internal world. The sun gets us is our focus, is our conscious mind, and it's was focused in Libra before, which is about the other, about partnerships, about harmony, getting along with others. In Scorpio, it's about turning internally, thinking about the spiritual, thinking about the psychological, the sexual, thinking about those kind of more taboo type subjects. And so it gets us to turn and look more within and to look at things on a deeper level. So I think it's interesting that both the Neptune moving back into Pisces and the sun going into Scorpio are happening on the same day. On October 23rd, we do have an aspect that's going on between the slower moving planets. On that day, we have Jupiter making a square with Chiron. So this is not just on this day. It is going to color, I think, around the last couple of weeks of October. Jupiter, is very much about expanding things. It is a benefic. It's about luck. It's in the sign of Cancer right now. So it's very much about expanding our sense of nurturing, our connection with the past, with history, also our imagination, our creativity, an emphasis on nurturing others too. And it's going to be coming up against that Chiron in Aries, which is very much about the wounds to the self and our self-identity. And so there may be some things that come up around this time where it's really asking us, like, how can we best nurture ourselves? Or are we not taking care of ourselves? How can we better care for ourselves? Because we may be stressed about some things that are going on in our lives or in the world. And then on October 29th, we have Mercury moving into the sign of Sagittarius. So again, Mercury is communication, Mercury is travel. And in Sagittarius, it's all about the big ideas. It's all about philosophy, religion, politics, the big ideas, right? Cut that out. It's all about the big ideas. And it's also about wanting to learn. It's wanting to expand our minds. So this is a great time to do foreign travel. This is a great time to go overseas. It's a great time to learn about some of these big ideas. And it's good to be open-minded. The problem with Mercury in Sagittarius is when it becomes dogmatic, when it's like, this is the only way to be, and there is no other way. It asks us to expand and open our minds instead of becoming politically or religiously dogmatic, to listen to others. Mercury in Sagittarius can also be like foot in mouth disease, as I say. It is like we don't think before we say something, and so that can be something that comes up too. Keep in mind, Mercury is going to be in Sagittarius and Scorpio to some extent until the end of the year, I think, because of the retrograde. So he goes into Sagittarius, goes retrograde, goes backwards, goes back into Scorpio for a bit, then moves forward again, and then has to go all the way through Sagittarius. So he's going to be there for a few weeks. And so we're going to have that energy with us for a while. But it's asking us to open our minds and to explore other possibilities and to learn things. So I think that's really positive. So this month will be interesting. I think, we have those outer planets, like we had Uranus is going to retrograde a little bit later in November back into Taurus for a bit. We have Neptune retrograde back to Pisces, and it really is sort of wrapping things up from that era, or saying, like, what is the positive thing that we can take away from this? What do we need to review and pack up before we move fully into that Neptune in Aries era? So let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if you like these things. Again, if you like the astrology, you can sign up for my free newsletter. I also have weekly detailed astrology reports on my Patreon, and I do astrology readings too. You can check out on my Etsy shop. But thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to those who watch this, who enjoy this. Let me know what your thoughts are. You might totally disagree with me on some things, but let me know. I'm totally okay with that. And also just thank you to my patrons for supporting me and making it's I'm able to do these things because of it. So thank you very much. As always, I'm sending you so much peace and love and rock.